This week on the WriterCon podcast,
Tough never quits.
welcome to WriterCon, a gathering place for writers to share their knowledge about writing and the writing world. Your hosts are William Bernhardt, best-selling novelist and author of the Red Sneaker books on writing, and Lara Bernhardt, award-winning author of the Wantland Files book series.
Thank you, Jesse Ulrich, and hello, writers. Or should it be more like, hey there, writers? I'm never sure about the energy level I should be bringing to this opening. I mean, should I be shouting because I'm excited and enthusiastic? Now I look at myself and I look like the Joker or something. Or should I be more chill? Because, you know, I'm a writer, and writers are cool. It's just finding the right tone. I don't know, Lara, what do you think?
I think whatever you do, you nail it.
Aww.
And now you know why I married her. But clearly I should have gone to Jesse first. Jesse, what do you think?
Listen, podcasts are like an intimate sharing sort of situation. So you should have the energy of like a fireside chat, like a nice cushy booth at a fancy restaurant. That's the tone.
Oh, I like that. Yeah. Do that one.
Did you like that one? Good. Yes. Well, as we record this, we've recently experienced presidential debates. And the only thing I learned is that apparently energy is everything. So I wanted to bring lots of energy, but maybe I wanted to bring energy this morning to the pickleball court too, but that didn't work out so well. So.
I needed more coffee. Yeah. It came along. You know, we woke up as we started exercising.
All right, now I'm going to practice my cool voice. Our interview today is with Raymond Paul Johnson, who is a prominent trial attorney of many years, who has now turned his hand to writing. It's a legal thriller, and it's a page-turner. It's called Conspiracy Ignited. We'll be talking to him about that and much more. But first, the news. First big news story. Barnes & Noble has purchased the Tattered Cover bookstore, the chain, the original and the satellite bookstores. Many of you will know what I'm talking about when I mention Tattered Cover. We live in Oklahoma and they're in Colorado, but it's close enough. They have been one of the best known, if not the best known, indie bookstore for decades. In fact, trivia moment, Lara, my very first ever out of town, like on the road book tour book signing for Perfect Justice, my first hardcover. This is like 94 or something. I'm dating myself. But anyway, it was at the Tattered Cover bookstore in Denver. And because it was January, there was, of course, a huge snowstorm.
Oh, no.
So I didn't even want to go when my escort showed up. And I mean, it's a blizzard. I was thinking, can we really make it? And she said, oh, yeah, we do this all the time. So I got to the bookstore. Exactly one person showed up in this blizzard, and she only came because I knew her in college, and so she showed up to say, but she did buy a book, and they taught me how to autograph books properly, and we had a fun night of not really the best snowstorm, but that wasn't really the news aspect of bringing up Tattered Cover. The problem is that this long and revered bookstore has had a tough couple of years. When I was there way back then, Joyce Mescus, who was the original owner and did it for many, many years, was still there. But in 2020, she sold it to new owners. And that's why you read about Tattered Cover becoming the largest Black-owned bookstore in the United States, which then led to controversy because they decided to, quote, remain neutral, end quote, on Black Lives Matter. And then last year they filed for bankruptcy. Well, now they've been purchased by Barnes & Noble. And who 5 years ago would have thought Barnes & Noble would be buying anything? That says something right in and of itself. The store and satellites will continue to operate under the Tattered Cover name. And Barnes & Noble anticipates it'll run pretty much as it did before. This actually makes a little bit more sense than it might seem at first, because as people who follow this podcast already know, Barnes & Noble is now led by James Daunt, a fellow that the owners brought over from England, where he saved the Waterstone bookstore chain. And part of what he did there was actually buying multiple independent bookstores and running them under the same names, but transforming them from risky, money-losing businesses to flourishing ones. Anyway, Lara, what's your take on this? Is this good news or bad?
I never like to see a bookstore go out of business. So I'm pleased that they picked it up and it can continue to operate as it did, especially since you have that little tie to it. I'm happy to see that opportunity for a brick and mortar store to remain open, both for authors and for readers. People can just get, and I like hearing that it's just going to be kind of business as usual. They're just going to keep moving forward with it. It apparently is a business model that's worked before. I hope it can keep working here.
Well, part of what Barnes & Noble has been doing, since Daunt took over, has in part been letting individual bookstores have more control about about what they're going to put up front to appeal to their local readers. And that's what Tattered Cover's been doing all along. I don't know, Jesse, what do you think? You're in Tulsa. There's already 2 Barnes & Nobles, plus a Books A Million. Would you shop at this at Tattered Cover, which is secretly a Barnes & Noble?
Yeah, here's the thing. I don't care necessarily who owns a company that already has its own branding. If they're buying that thing, and leaving it be, then I'm fine with it. Again, like it's one of those things where, like,
better than bankruptcy, right?
Yeah, like
Yes.
where we had too many bookstores to be able to stay sort of economically viable, and now like they got rid of too many of them, and now it's like we actually need a couple more bookstores. So instead of like buying new land, having to construct new stores, you buy a company that already exists and just let them just run it better, probably.
Right.
From
Hopefully.
a background standpoint, just leave it be. I think it's great.
Does make sense. It's already a bookstore, right?
Yeah, it's already a bookstore.
Okay, news story number 2. This is about authors' equity. They've announced their first 10 titles. Again, listeners of the podcast will remember when we announced the formation of authors' equity, which is, bottom line, a small group of veterans of the traditional New York publishing industry coming together to form their own publishing company. And now they've announced what their first titles are going to be. And many are being written by known quantities, previously published to New York authors. James Frey, controversial, probably the best known one. And here's something that I also found interesting. Not only does it announce the new titles and authors, but announces what editor has been assigned to each of them, which doesn't normally happen. Some of them are interesting. I don't know. Maybe I'm being rude. I don't think any of them sound breathtakingly exciting. Like I didn't read the bio and think, that's going to hit number 1. I did think the list was very New York and in both names and topics. So, Jesse, are these people really doing anything innovative, or are they just going to make the big 5 the big 6?
I guess it's how you view like how they chose which books to do, and are they doing it different than the big 5, or are they just doing it the same and calling themselves something different? So I guess we'll have to wait and see. But
they're doing less. If they've got 10 books for the next season even, but it's probably more like the next half year or so, then that's way less books than you're going to see coming out of Penguin Random House. So maybe that'll give them a chance to focus more. I'm not sure that necessarily means they're going to sell better. Yeah. I don't know. Lara, I heard you respond when I mentioned that the editorial assignments were being announced. What do you think about that?
That's so different. And I'm sitting here thinking that I feel like, do we think they're doing that to add that level of credibility, saying, look, we've got editors devoted to these projects, good editors? I think from the editor's standpoint, it puts a little bit of stress on you, the pressure to do a really good job. On the flip side of that, I've edited some books where they go on to win awards, or I see them perform really well, and I think, oh, I wish everyone knew that I was involved with that book.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I helped craft it into the book that it is today, that is getting great reviews and winning awards and doing well. So I have some mixed feelings. I think having that announced up front, I would then feel pressure. I would worry that I wasn't living up to the challenge, but on the back end of it, when it does well, it would be kind of nice to have that recognition.
It did make me wonder why we don't include that, like on the the Versa page where we put all the copyright info. Next week we're interviewing a guy who writes for comic books, among other things. Comic books always identify the editor of the story. And of course, if you've been to a movie and sat through the roughly 8 minutes of credits, they identify everybody. Yep. So, I think this is not a bad idea, actually. And might, even for smaller publishers, might lend credibility to the work if we saw, yes, they did in fact have an editor. And maybe editors would be more careful. I don't know if they knew their name was going to be on it.
It's an interesting choice. I'm excited to see where it goes.
Yeah, me too. All right, Jesse, let's hear that interview music and talk to Raymond Paul Johnson. Raymond Paul Johnson, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you, Bill. Thank you.
All right, traditional, and you're coming to us live from ALA, right? I really appreciate you taking time out from the fun to do a podcast interview.
It's quite an experience. Anyone who hasn't should come, because you get thousands and thousands of book lovers running around the San Diego.
That sounds amazing.
Exactly. But not in a while. Okay, traditional first question. If you could offer writers one piece of advice, what would it be?
I think it would probably be one of the sub-themes of my book, Conspiracy Ignited. And in a few words, the two main characters, whenever they get into trouble, remind themselves of their saying that they developed over the years of friendship, and that's tough never quits. And tough never quits. Yeah, and for writing, especially, because none of us just sit and, well, I shouldn't say none, maybe James Lee Burke does, or Nelson DeMille, but most of us do not sit and always have the love flowing, and you get some tough points and you got to I go take some coffee and I come back and do it again.
Yeah, that sounds good. Well, tell us more about your book, Conspiracy Ignited. What's it about?
Well, it's a legal thriller, although pre-release reviews have called it an action-adventure thriller. Actually, someone said it was a political thriller, which I never thought of it as such. But what it's about is a lawyer who happens to be a pilot, and he has a practice. And what's different about this lawyer than most lawyers and most legal thrillers is he does civil litigation. He's what they call a trial attorney, a trial lawyer. In most books, they're either criminal lawyers or corporate lawyers, and running around like the firm, they run. But this is a civil litigator, and I think what I would say is different about this book, I wanted them to be very real. So I really wanted to introduce people to the life of a civil trial attorney in America, because I didn't think there's much written about it, not in the way of fiction. So and he's going about his cases. He flies all up and down the West Coast to do depositions and things, and then all of a sudden, all hell breaks loose. And in fact, all of a sudden, the first paragraph of the book, all hell breaks loose. And he doesn't know it, but there's a secret society that's trying to take over the third wing of our government, trying to take over judges and justices. and control the courtrooms. The idea being that if you can control the courtrooms, you can make a lot of money. Secondly, you get real control, like we see in the headlines today with decisions that are made at all levels of the judiciary. Yeah.
So I'm going to have to ask what everybody else is thinking. Does this relate to current contemporary real world events in any way?
Yes, but not immediate. We've got to remember I'm traditionally published. So this
been
book
out for a
was
while.
actually in final 2 years ago. It took 2 years from final to get to it. And by the way, my publishers, I got to show this because this is the cover. Can you see that?
Yep.
That was done by my publisher, the cover design person. And the minute I saw it, I said, "You've got it. We don't have to." Sometimes I have to go through 25 of these. I said, "Not
That's
this
the
time."
best feeling when you just open it up and you're like, they got it.
Bam,
That's
and
wonderful.
so yeah, and the reason it's so perfect is because again, it's the Raven Society. They're a cabal, basically a terrorist cabal, actually part paramilitary too. And she's got the courthouse, and then she's got this ravens coming down. And of course, the big secret in the book, I'll tell everybody now, is a group of ravens is called a conspiracy. A group of ravens is called
wonderful.
A conspiracy. So yeah, so it all came together really nicely. Yeah.
Very interesting. Yeah. So you did weave in, I guess, some current events, but I'm also hearing you talk about your protagonist being a pilot and lawyer. So how did your time as a combat pilot and an attorney influence your writing? Did you use a lot, or did you just kind of weave in some experiences? How did that come about?
Well, to answer the question directly, we lawyers should do that. We should answer the question directly.
Or our witnesses should. Yeah,
well, that's true. That's true. But I mean, you teach by example. Almost every scene in the book, every scene, certainly every major scene, is based on a composite of things I either experienced or witnessed in my life. And for instance, I spent 6 months with the CIA in a combat situation, and this pilot, his name's Eric Ridge, by the way. That's the name of the lawyer protagonist. And he also spent that time. And so when he gets in real trouble in the book, he calls on his friends at the CIA. And that helps for a while, but, good times don't flow forever. And poor Eric does have some problems, including the CIA bail on him. So then he's left alone with he has a small law firm and some good friends. And they basically are left alone against this secret society that they only know about, and they can't tell other people for reasons I can't say right now.
Cool.
But
Now, you've been a trial lawyer for like 35 years or more. I should warn you up front, I am a lawyer as well, although I haven't practiced in about 35 years. And I also have written legal thrillers. This book has a lot to say about the legal system, some of it pretty dark. Can you talk more about that?
Yeah, I wanted to be real. Writing this book, I wanted it to be real because so many legal thrillers, I think, are not. And so I really wanted to do the good, the bad, and the ugly of civil litigation and judges and even the jury system. And throughout the book, I speak to that through the characters, of course. An example being once in a while you'll run into a judge that just has her or his mind made up. And
doesn't matter what you say.
Oh my God. From a trial attorney's point of view, it really was the only thing that angered me in more than, I've been practicing now more than 35 years in trial courts all over the country. And it's just when you run into a judge like that, it's like you might as well just, tell your client, we got to go on appeal. We'll be on appeal.
We'll win it next time.
And that takes 2 or 3 years sometimes.
Yeah.
So it's not good news. But on the other hand, what I try to point out in the book is there are some judges that are just sent from God. I mean, they don't have their mind made up. They take everything based on the evidence and facts, and they make really, really good decisions. And that's like being in heaven when that happens to you.
Do you have trouble juggling both careers? Because you're still practicing law, right? And now writing and probably working on another book after this one. So how do you handle that?
Okay, that's kind of interesting. I tried to write this novel while I was practicing. And I think you know what that means. That means I'm writing this thing at airports, on airplanes as I'm going to depositions in different states, in hotel rooms, in between other things. And so all I had at the end of a year and a half of doing that was fragments, pieces. I didn't have to ask anybody. I knew it's going nowhere. And so along came COVID. And COVID was an opportunity. So I cranked back on my practice. Boy, did I ever crank back on it. To the point where today I really, because I am writing full time now, I teach at the University of Southern California. I teach, I teach law, product liability, aviation law, and aviation safety. And then I consult on cases around the nation because that doesn't take everything out of me. I want to put everything in the writing.
So you're juggling several careers, really.
Yeah, but I've done that all my life. Do I get bored easy? No, I tell people I have trouble keeping a job. That's the problem. I keep switching.
Focus issues.
But you just got to roll with it. But I enjoy that. I enjoy having, various things that I can just focus on and then focus here. And of course, the juggling is sometimes you can't focus. And that's what was the problem until I cranked back the practice to the point where I could write really full time.
Now, I know you handled, this is in your press release, so I assume it's okay to bring up, you handled a landmark jury trial against Toyota based on four-wheel drive pickups' alleged propensity to roll over. And actually, the verdict you got was the first of its kind in the nation. Can you talk about that?
Sure. It was a great case. Not because I was on it. It just had great facts. And the bad part about it was in Toyota's hometown. It was the Torrance Superior Courthouse. And at that time, Toyota's in Texas now, but then they were in Torrance, California. So, it was like I thought I was going to get hometown very badly. And I did. And the other thing was it was the first of its type, the case in the nation. There had been some, I don't know, you have to go back a ways, but the 60 Minutes had done an article on the Jeep CJ6 and CJ7 about how they tend, if they get sideways, they just roll over because they have high centers of gravity. And I saw the same thing with the four-wheel drive pickups that were being marketed because they wanted it to look like a CJ7. So what did they do? They raised it up, this high center of gravity. They were rolling. And so when the case came along, I think like 10 really good lawyers passed on it. And I said, no, I see this as something that'll set a standard. And it did. Today, in fact, it changed the industry. Today, we don't have many of those types of vehicles. We have what we call crossover vehicles. They're lower center of gravity. They still look like sports utility vehicles, but they are safe. If they get sideways, they just skip to a stop rather than roll. So that was
as usual. Despite all the grief lawyers get, you in fact made the world a better, safer place, right?
That's awesome.
Right, and I try to have the book talk to that. In other words, through the characters. There's no lecturing in it because nobody likes to hear lectures. But through the characters, I speak to that and the fact that you can change the world. And in fact, what happens here is he does stop the world from going way downhill, a non-democracy, basically.
That reminds me of something else. And Lara, I apologize. I'm gonna geek out on one more legal question, then I'll let you talk about writing.
Nope, go for it.
But I noticed
I'm finding it fascinating. So you go right ahead.
I noticed when I got the book a little in advance. I haven't finished it. I apologize, but I love what I've read. And what I really admired was the way you write about, because I encounter this problem too. When you've got to at least, I don't want to say superficially, but in a thin way, you've got to explain some legal concept so the plot makes sense, but you're writing to mostly non-lawyers and you want them to understand it without getting boring. That's a tough, and turning it into like a law textbook, that's a tough tightrope to walk, but you do that very well. What's your approach?
Yeah. Well, the approach is, first of all, don't lecture. Secondly, do it in an entertaining way. In other words, there is, we won't get into the details, but there's a thing called a silent conflict, which is a thing about law. And I needed to explain it. And I'm assuming most of my readers are non-lawyers. So I did it conversationally and in a setting that was interesting. They were on a boat. They were having coffee together. And when I thought about that, doing it from a conversation viewpoint, then it all came together. Because even lawyers, when we start talking to one another over coffee, we don't sit there and speak Latin to each other, you know, we speak real speak. And so that's what I have. I have the characters speaking real. You know, I got to say, there was a pre-release review, one of them by an editor-in-chief of a magazine. And she's a trial lawyer herself. And she said something that really was great, I thought, because she captured what I was trying to do. She said, Johnson's bad guys are really, in italics, bad, and his good guys are really real. And I said, Sharon, you got it. You know, that's what I was trying to do. So.
Very nice.
Can you tell us a little bit about your path to publication?
Oh, okay. It's maybe a little different. Are you ready for a little different?
Yeah,
Yes.
always.
Okay, here we go. Okay, so I had the fragments, then I cranked back my practice, and now I'm writing. Boom, boom, boom. I have my manuscript in February of 2022. The manuscript is final. And while I'm doing that, I'm looking at the publishing industry, because the only thing I'd published is nonfiction. I did about 50 technical articles and one big treatise, but it was all nonfiction. Mm-hmm. But I thought, you know, I know publishers and editors in the nonfiction world. When I'm ready, I'm just going to call them and say, hey, do you have any friends in the fiction world? And here's where I slammed into the wall. They didn't. The nonfiction people don't talk to the fiction people. The fiction people don't even know who the nonfiction people are. Mm-hmm. So I was at square one. And I started looking at querying, which is, to a non-writer, that whole process is craziness.
Yeah. To everyone, it's a very daunting process.
I really couldn't believe it existed, to tell you the truth. But then I realized it did exist. So I threw out a dozen query letters and got nothing back. I mean, I didn't even get a rejection. And I was ghosted. So I said, you know what, Ray, you got to go back to school. I went back to more like Writers Con. You know, I went to writers conventions. Mm-hmm. I went to webinars through Writers Digest University and other groups. And the international thriller writers were really great. They'd have nice classes, good classes. So I'm starting to get that. And then James Lee Burke, who I think is the master crime fiction writer alive today. James Lee Burke was interviewed, and I was on the webinar listening to the interview. And they said, James, have you ever been rejected? And he goes, yes, 323 times or some number like that. And I said to myself, okay, Ray, hold it. Stop. If James Lee Burke gets 346 or whatever the heck it was, rejections, I could do thousands. I mean, I could just keep going. You know, I have no problem. And then I said, you know what? You're not going to go that way. And I went to competitions, and I just took that manuscript and I put it in the few international competitions that allow unpublished manuscripts to bounce against published books.
Right.
And I won't bore you with the details, but of the 5 that I entered, I was a finalist in each and every one except for the one where I was first place. So, but once I got up to be finalist in 3 of them, including the Clive Custer Adventure Writers competition,
Right.
Everything changed. I had 3 agent offers, and then I had multiple publication offers too. So that's my little secret. If anybody wants to try to take a shortcut,
Yeah, no, that's
throw it out there
inspiring
and see what happens. Yeah.
That's great advice. Here's another approach that people might be interested in trying. And thank you for sharing that.
Well, I highly recommend it. I mean, I think it's a thing to do because if you think about it, there's hardly any downside. Most of the good competitions are very inexpensive, like $25, $50, $100, probably max. If they're legitimate competitions,
right?
That works.
That's the important
thing.
So
So and if you're not a finalist, so what? I mean, you tried.
You don't have to tell anyone. You don't have to tell anyone you're entering.
No, you don't have
Just
to
do it.
You don't have to post it on social media.
That's right. So you talked about how you first started writing. You were just getting those fragments and bits and pieces when you were working around here and there. Now that you're writing full time, what does your typical writing day look like? You have a kind of a set process, or?
Well, it's a little strange, and maybe you could tell me why this is, but I know. I mean, I need some advice. I'm a night person. I've always been. Right. And, the worst part of trying a case was having to be there at 9 a.m. That was hard. I could work all night.
The world does not like night people.
I know.
It doesn't cooperate with
wow. So, but then when the COVID thing came along and I cranked back to practice, I said, well, now, Ray, you got to get serious. I mean, if you're going to do it.
Your time has come. That's right.
So I would get up at 4 a.m. 4 a.m. Whether I wanted to or not. And I'd write until coffee break at 10. And, no, I'm not saying I didn't sometimes write chapters at night because I am a night person. But most of the heavy writing was done in that time frame when even my dog was sleeping. I mean, and it was just total silence. And that was great for me. That's what works for me.
Interesting. Do you plan out? Do you outline? Are you a pantser or a planner?
I am you're never going to see more of a pantser than me. I am. I start a scene. I don't even know how the scene's going to end. I let the characters drive me. It's the characters that are going to tell me what to do. And certainly I never know how a chapter is going to end. And I didn't know how the book was going to end. And by the way, Bill, when you do get to the ending, I'd love to get your opinion on it. I really would. But I will tell you that ending came at the end. I did not know how it was going to end.
Interesting. We've heard this before, and I never cease to be fascinated by how many approaches there are to this wonderful craft that we pursue. There's no one way.
Most people are hybrid, don't you? And most of the writers I've talked to seem to be a hybrid. They do some outlining and some organic writing, if you want to call it that, but pantsering. My favorite author, besides James Lee Burke, because he's up in the stratosphere, but of the normal people of the world, it's Michael Connelly, who I think is a great writer, and he's a pantser too. I didn't know that until after I had written Conspiracy Ignited, but and that's probably why I was drawn to his work. I've read every book he's ever written.
Fascinating. So I think you hinted, or maybe I guessed, but at any rate, I think you're working on something else now. What can we look forward to seeing from you in the future?
An Eric Ridge thriller. Eric Ridge being the lawyer that's in the middle of all this.
Eric Ridge 2?
Eric Ridge 2. It's going to at least be 3 series. That's my plan. But,
Is this Conspiracy Ablaze? Because it was ignited in the first one. So
how did you know that?
How
did you know
you're
that?
Joking, right?
No, it's the working title. That's the working title.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Well, that's impressive.
And then the
working
third
title of
is-
this was the Raven Society, because it's about the
Mhm.
Raven Society. But, when you get together with your publisher and your editor and all these other people of the world, you compromise. And I thought it was a great compromise, by the way. But
Mhm.
yeah,
Mhm.
Bill, that's amazing.
Well, and
'Cause,
then third is Conspiracy Inferno. I don't know.
we don't
Where
know.
do you-
Well, that's very interesting. I've got a neighbor who's kind of a wise guy, and he says, well, why don't you just go with Conspiracy Extinguished? I said, stop.
No.
Yeah.
You can't put it out.
Stop.
That's a
So I
mistake.
don't know. But anyway, it is the working title, though. Great.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, Ray, thanks so much for being on the podcast. This has
Okay.
been a real pleasure.
Well, thank you, and thank you for asking me. And I hope to see you soon. I do plan on
Likewise.
coming out to a writers' con. So
That would be
I'll-
fantastic.
have
We'd
you.
love to have you. Just a few parting words. Lara, we are getting very close to the WriterCon retreat.
I started packing.
Oh, well, that means it's really going to happen, I guess. What are you looking forward to at the retreat?
We have not just some familiar faces coming back, but we have some new people joining us. It's filling up pretty quickly, but I'm so excited to meet our newcomers and start reading their pages and establish those connections and see who's going to be our next best-selling author that comes out of one of our retreats. This is really the way to get the most work done on your manuscript, in my opinion. We really roll up our sleeves and get busy during these retreats, and you learn a lot, and then you get so much feedback on your manuscript. I just don't think there's anything better. And then, of course, we're going to be having meals and snacks together. I'm looking forward to hiking, hot tubbing, all the things that are available to us at the spa. So we're gonna work hard and play hard, and I'm ready to get away and unplug.
Good. This is going to sound a little braggy, but I've had people tell me they felt like they were writing at a higher and better level after 5 days of the retreat and reading their work. I agreed.
Yes.
I think it's well, and we should mention it's not just you and me. Lauren Smith, who's a USA Today best-selling author, is coming out one day, and Amy Brewer, one of the best agents in the world, is coming out, and I think there's going to be somebody else, but it's not quite confirmed, so I won't say that yet. But we're going to have a great faculty. So if you'd like to spend 5 days in a beautiful location writing and improving or starting your work in progress, we don't care where you are in the process, come to the WriterCon retreat. And since this is the first podcast we've recorded since my new book came out, I gotta mention that I got a new book out. It's called Justice for All. It's Daniel Pike legal thriller number 8. But this one's a team. Oh, did I say team up? No, it's like a cage match against NC Rivera from the Splitsville series. So I'm doing another crossover book, but this time they're on opposite ends of the courtroom. And let me tell you, sparks fly. That's Justice for All by me. All right, then, everyone. You heard what Ray Johnson said, tough doesn't quit, which is pretty much a variation of what I say every week, isn't it? All right? Keep writing. And remember, you cannot fail if you refuse to quit. See you next time.